Welcome once again, Cave of the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
I'm Tony.
And we're at the penultimate chapter of James Anderson's.
That like next to the last?
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
Okay.
It's a fancy word.
Yeah.
College men around here. But we're getting ready to finish up James Anderson's Why Should I Believe Christianity? And we've been going through it and learning if there are good reasons to believe Christianity to be true. So he's kind of made a case of kind of the best and showed that the Christian worldview is at least internally consistent within itself. And there are points that you can't just pull apart and view individually. And so...
and basically he argued, you can't explain anything without God's existence, right? You need God in order to explain anything.
Good presuppositionalist. That's kind of the one that we go to, the one we hang our hat on a lot. And so we covered the importance of Jesus Christ. No shock there, considering the Christian aspect of the worldview part. And Dr. Anderson kind of forms everything like, yes, Jesus is a good person. He's a good teacher. He's known for within other religions, but the Christian presentation of him that he revealed himself to his believers, what he said about himself, and ultimately his resurrection is important for our understanding of the Christian worldview and the coherency within itself. And so that's what we're covering in Chapter 7, called Defining Death. So he starts out by saying that one of the most appealing aspects of Christianity is its teaching about life, death, and life after death. So it doesn't end here, folks. So according to the biblical Christian worldview, death isn't part of the original creation. The shadow of death that hangs over all of us is a consequence of a rebellion against God. It's just a penalty for our sin. The good news, though, is that God has provided a solution through his Son, who became one of us so that he could suffer the penalty of death in our place. So all those foreshadowings in the Old Testament culminates in the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And continuing on from there, the story doesn't just end at the going up into the clouds and saying, get ready, Arnold Schwarzenegger version, I'll be back.
Yeah.
But
I'll be back.
That the church abides and continues to do what Adam was supposed to do, what Israel was supposed to do, and ultimately what Jesus did and set up and carry on to the end times. But Jesus died, but he didn't stay dead. Darn. On the third day, he rose from the dead and appeared alive to many people over the course of 40 days before he ascended into heaven. And so that's what Dr. Anderson is going to be talking about in the rest of our chapter.
Right, and of course the resurrection of Jesus is one of the most distinct, he tells us, and essential teachings of Christianity. It was central to the message preached by the first Christians. In fact, if you read through the book of Acts, it's amazing how over and over and over again they talk about Jesus rising from the dead.
Yeah.
We in our modern day, when we witness and share the gospel, I don't think we talk a whole lot about the resurrection of Christ, but boy, do they do it. They did it in the first century in the book of Acts. The Apostle Paul stated, in fact, frankly, that if Jesus is still dead and buried, then Christianity is worthless, and Christians should be pitied for their false hope, right?
Right.
So simply put, Anderson tells us Christianity stands or falls on its claim that Jesus rose from the dead, that his tomb is empty and he is alive even now. And he says that, of course, this is quite an extraordinary claim, and so he asks, why should anyone believe it?
All right.
Right?
So he does say that, it's hard to believe. He says, let's be honest, it's not easy to believe that a man who was publicly executed returned from the dead 3 days later. So why do we believe it? We must be crazy. The short answer is, well, because the Bible says so. However, that doesn't mean Christians believe it on the basis of blind faith, that is, without reason or evidence or trust. On the contrary, the reports of Jesus' resurrections in the New Testament are grounded in credible eyewitness testimony. Again, there's this idea, and it comes from, faults of our own, of not being clear on what faith is, but faith isn't this kind of claim of knowledge, it's a claim of trust. We get our knowledge from other avenues. And so when we talk about blind faith, like believing that all that there is physical and there's nothing beyond that, that would be kind of a, well, I just kind of believe that for right now. So so we have a definition here of blind faith, and Christians don't believe in the resurrection just because of blind faith.
There are reasons, there is evidence, right? And he says probably the question in folks' minds is not why Christians believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but rather why they should believe it, right? So he wants, what he wants to do in this chapter is he says he'll make the case that despite what anyone believes or may assume, there are good reasons, there are no good reasons, rather, not to believe in Jesus' resurrection, and many good reasons to accept it, right? So no good reasons to reject it, and many good reasons to accept it, is what he's going to argue in this chapter, right?
And so, of course, we have to talk about the possibility of miracles, because this seems like a big deal. So let's begin by dealing with some of the main objections to the resurrection. Clearly, if Jesus returned from the dead, that would be a miraculous event. Dead men usually stay dead.
Right.
That's the claim. Resurrections aren't natural events.
That's right.
The natural course of events is for dead people to stay dead. So if the resurrection actually occurred, it would require a supernatural cause to explain. There's some issues with that.
Yeah, well, some people, he says, dismiss the claim that Jesus rose from the dead because they think miracles are impossible in principle, right? And this was actually one of David Hume's, he was 1700 philosopher, skeptic actually. This was one of his claims, right? Miracles are impossible in principle. That is, miracles just can't happen. Now, he didn't really argue that. Hume argued more, so this is kind of a more ontological, metaphysical type of claim, right? It's impossible for it to happen. Hume's really, his argument had to do with how do we know a miracle happened? So we call that epistemological argument, right? But anyway, he does deal with this in his paper on miracles. So, miracles can happen is what some people claim, right? Every event has a natural cause, and of course a miracle would violate the laws of nature. But the laws of nature can't be violated. If they could, they wouldn't be laws, right? So notice we have a really succinct and tight argument here, right? We say that every event has a natural cause, right? A miracle then would violate the natural cause of any event, right? It violate the laws of nature. Of course, they can't be violated, and so therefore miracles can happen. So there it is, right?
Tuck it away. We're there.
Yeah.
Well, such thing is very common, but it's also very flawed. Laws aren't, by definition, unavoidable. Just think about the laws of logic, for example, which are regularly flouted.
Yeah, in fact, the laws can be violated, and they are violated all the time.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Strictly speaking, the laws of nature only describe how things proceed naturally. That is, how the natural universe behaves in normal circumstances. I always think of like you drop a rock from a height, law of gravity, it's the law, it's got to obey it, and so it falls to the ground. It will always fall to the ground. Now you reach up and you catch the rock. Oh, you violated the laws of gravity. The world is left and right, up is down, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
What he means is Old Testament, Mr. Mayor. Real wrath of God type stuff.
Exactly.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes. The dead rising from the grave.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Enough, I get the point.
But the laws of nature, by definition, don't tell us anything about supernatural causes.
Right. And so this is an interesting point, right? The laws of nature, yes, they do, tell us how things generally and normally work, right? But if we're talking about the existence of God and miracles and that sort of thing, we're not talking about how things generally and normally work. We're talking about supernatural, right, events where God intervenes, right? In other words, if there's a God who created this universe, then miracles, he tells us, must be possible, right? In fact, some have argued that the biggest miracle is in Genesis chapter 1.
Right.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right?
Oh, from a collection of things that he watered and eventually grew. No, from ex nihilo, from nothing.
So he tells us to insist that miracles are impossible is really to deny the existence of God, right? But he's already argued that the most basic aspects of human experience, they don't need, they only make sense based on the existence of God. And so consequently, he says every reason to believe in God is also a reason to believe that miracles are possible, that things can happen which defy any purely natural explanation. So if you believe in God, you have to believe in miracles. Right? The only reason you wouldn't believe in miracles is you don't believe in God.
Right. Right. And he says ironically, for this reason, the popular idea that miracles conflict with science has things backwards.
Oh, okay. So miracles conflict with science. How is that backwards?
Well, science is only possible because the universe is the creation of an orderly, rational, personal God. The same God who makes science possible also makes miracles possible. So in reality, those who deny the possibility of miracles are dismissing the Christian worldview from the onset without considering the actual evidence for it. And so, the universe is chaotic, and it goes through this change process, and there's a system that helps us in survival. It also forms chemicals in the stars, and so why wouldn't it continue to form and create things? And why not universes within universes? And why does it have order? Why does it sustain itself? Why does it do all the things that we kind of take for granted? Why do we look up at the night sky and we don't worry about the implosion of the atmosphere? It happens to hold in the way that it does. Yeah. And so,
that's
in the chaos of the universe that we're supposed to be in awe of. Why aren't we in awe of the mundane of just it continuing?
Right. So both miracles and science are dependent on God. In fact, we use science, right, as a way to help us recognize miracles, because science, at least to a certain extent, tells us what's the natural order of things, how naturally things. And miracles are supernatural, right? So science doesn't conflict with miracles. In fact, it exposes miracles, right? Because miracles are those things that happen outside of science that are supernatural, right? So, I think he's on to something here, right?
And C.S. Lewis wrote this good book that you let me borrow one time, and of course now I quote it endlessly, so you're to blame for getting me into Lewis more. But in this book, Miracles, he writes this: "For this reason, the question whether miracles occur can never be answered simply by experience. Every event that might claim to be a miracle is, in the last resort, something presented to our senses, something seen, heard, touched, smelled, or tasted. And our senses are not infallible. If anything extraordinary seems to have happened, we can always say that we have been the victims of an illusion. We hold a philosophy which excludes the supernatural. This is what we always shall say. What we learn from experience depends on the kind of philosophy we bring to experience. It is therefore useless to appeal to experience before we have settled, as well as we can, the philosophical question." So Lewis has this almost presuppositional view.
Oh, yeah. He says it's based on your worldview whether or not a miracle could happen. And so let's look at your worldview first, right? Your philosophy. And if your philosophy rules out miracles, then of course nothing that you see, hear, taste, touch, or whatever will prove to you that a miracle is a miracle. But if your philosophy doesn't rule out miracles, now you can look, we might say, objectively, or at least more objectively at events and make certain kinds of decisions, right?
Yeah,
Determination.
It's that if the impossible is the only explanation left, then the impossible is what you should go to. Yeah. And we talked with J. Warner Wallace about this in our interview. We asked him the question, if you're coming to a crime scene now and you have this broader worldview of including the supernatural, and all kind of natural explanations are gone away with, would you tend towards the supernatural. He says, well, by the very fact that I do believe in the supernatural, if it defied all natural explanations, then the supernatural is still available to us to talk about. So
it gives us other avenues to help us to explain, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, so what about the probability of miracles, right? Even if miracles are possible, right, because God exists and that sort of thing, it doesn't follow, he tells us, that it's reasonable to believe any bizarre miracle claim that happens to come our way. And, of course, that's true, right? We ought to be generally skeptical about miracle claims. That's what he says. If there's a plausible natural explanation for some phenomenon, we should prefer that over a supernatural explanation, right? We don't just willy-nilly believe in anything, any account. If there is a natural explanation, that's what we should gravitate toward. He says, however, that some critics of Christianity have taken this, what he calls default skepticism, a step further and argue that natural explanations should always be preferred no matter what, right? And so that's what he wants to take issue with, right?
But it's a mistake to think that miracles are so intrinsically improbable that it could never be reasonable to believe one had actually occurred. To see this point, let's consider another kind of improbable event, winning the lottery.
All right. Well, yeah, I'd love to see that.
Great thought experiment. Just to be on the safe side, we should petition the government to let us, carry out this.
That's right. That is, let us win the lottery. Is that? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, works for me.
Yeah. So let's assume that 10 million tickets are sold this week, and your friend Alex buys one ticket, and that every ticket has an equal chance of winning. So the odds of Alex winning the lottery this week are 1 in 10 million. Obviously, with those odds, it's extremely improbable that Alex, not just anyone, but Alex specifically, will win the lottery. But he goes on to do this. And so 10 million, 1 in 10 million is actually a pretty good odds for the lottery. I just want to say that this thought experiment is already should dissuade you from.
He should up it with at least another zero, right? 100 million.
So again, it goes on to say, imagine, however, that Alex calls you the day of the draw in the state of unprecedented excitement. He's almost hysterical as he screams down the phone, "I won the lottery!
All right.
I got it! I got the winning ticket! Run home, Charlie Bucket!" The point here is that the probability that an event has occurred can be raised when we have specific evidence for it. In this case, your friend's testimony, backed up by his personal trustworthiness. Is Alex a good guy? Is he known for practical jokes or lying? Well, if my good friend Alex is on the phone telling me he won the lottery and I know he plays the lottery, that puts more confidence within my believability in him winning. In light of the evidence, it would be perfectly reasonable for you to conclude that your friend has indeed won the lottery.
Yeah, so the issue here is miracles are improbable. Well, maybe, but if we have the right kind of evidence and that sort of thing, then that doesn't mean that it's unreasonable to claim that something improbable has happened. That's the argument that he's trying to make, right? So we can, they're reasonable. It can be reasonable in certain circumstances to believe in some improbable event has happened. Right?
So he gives this example of Christopher Hitchens saying, there's this stranger on the bus that comes up to you and says, well, you know I was dead, right? And so what confidence do you have in that? Well, in his really good debate series with Doug Wilson says, okay, now, instead of a stranger on the train, make it your friend who's telling you that you've known for quite some time that he's told you he's dead, he was dead, now he's alive. Would that instill greater confidence? Okay, now put the context of Jesus and his disciples. This isn't a stranger coming up to disciples and saying, hey, I was once dead and now I'm alive. This is a greater confidence that we should have.
Who predicted his death and resurrection.
We can't just take a piecemeal out. We have to put it in a context, historical, a timeline and all these things. So it's not a one-to-one correlation that skeptics like to bring about here.
So next he talks about the reasonableness of the resurrection. So not just the reasonableness of believing in miracles in general, but the reasonableness of the resurrection. He says, that we can see the initial improbability of an event isn't a sufficient reason to think that it didn't happen. we have to take into account, as you have mentioned there, other factors such as the context of the event, the specific evidence that, that it actually occurred, and those types of things. Considered entirely in the abstract with no historical context, someone dying and coming back to life and then sitting on the bus and telling you that they did that is an extraordinarily improbable event, right? But clearly, Jesus was no ordinary person, right? If anyone could be described as extraordinary, it would be Jesus.
Right. and we do this in our daily lives in the court system. Why are people that have no connection whatsoever with the crime scene brought in to talk about the people who are talking about things? Well, how well have you known this person? What type of character are they? Are they prone to fits of violence? Are they quick to lash out at strangers who have they attacked anyone before? And so you bring in other people to talk about the confidence of your witnesses or your suspect or victim or whoever it might be. You're bringing in outside people to help bolster the claim of their believability. And so that's exactly what we see in the New Testament. And Jesus being kind of the central figure of that comes into play here. So the resurrection wasn't a freak supernatural event that happened out of the blue with no connection to other events, right? It's not.
There's a context, right?
It's not a big wind that blows. Yeah. It happens to part two bodies of water, and all of a sudden these people start streaming across for no reason whatsoever.
No, there's a whole lot more going on, right?
Yeah. So quite the contrary, the resurrection was the climax, the point of all history is what our claim is.
The high point, here point.
Right. So it was the climax of a series of remarkable events that stretched far back into human history. Genesis 3, pretty much. I mean, obviously way before that for God's perspective, but for us, it kind of comes into play in Genesis 3 there. And in the previous chapter, we talked about this, and then he talked about it, of how Jesus explicitly claimed to be the Messiah, a Savior King, sent from God in fulfillment of numerous Old Testament prophecies.
Right. And, some of these prophecies implied that this Messiah would also be raised from the dead.
Right, yeah.
He gives us one in Psalm 16:10. It says, "You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay." Right? Well, that's pretty straightforward. Now, he tells us that Jesus' disciples later pointed out, although this was written by the Israelite King David 1,000 years before Jesus was born, it couldn't apply to David himself because David died and his body did decay, right? And so it was pointing forward to one who would die but not stay dead. David was giving us a prophecy, is what the apostles argued with regard to this particular passage. Right?
So Jesus himself confirmed this expectation by explicitly predicting on several occasions not only that he would be put to death because of his claims, but also that he would rise from the dead.
Right.
So,
in fact, over and over again, he tells his disciples, "I'm gonna rise."
So much so that they think that he's talking in parable form, where he's like, "Listen, I'm going to die. In 3 days, I will rise again." Well, what could he mean by this? Why do you speak in these riddles? And then when he speaks in riddles, in these kind of parallels, he says, if you destroy this temple, I will raise it up in 3 days. Well, he's talking about the temple. He's a terrorist. We need to take him out.
That's right.
Okay. All right. We can claim obtuseness a lot, even of us. So. Admittedly, the fact that Jesus predicted his own resurrection doesn't prove that the resurrection occurred. But when we put those predictions in context of everything else Jesus said and did, his remarkable teachings, his superlative moral character, his reputation as a miracle worker, it should at least raise our expectations. Again, if we're talking about Plantica, we're bolstering us against defeaters. And
That's right.
we're adding to claims that make the probability, I guess, more likely. Well, probability, probably stay away from that term, but more confidence.
Yeah, right. So the fact that Jesus was renowned as a healer and a miracle worker, even among his enemies, is, he tells us, particularly significant, right? So to repeat, Jesus was clearly no ordinary man. Even secular historians will concede that Jesus had a well-established reputation as a miraculous healer an exorcist with supernatural powers over evils, and one who possessed the power even to raise the dead. Although, historians disagree about how Jesus gained that reputation, right? In other words, they agree that he had the reputation. They're not sure how he got the reputation, right?
He paid off people. He was a rich man.
That's right. But Anderson tells us that everything we know about Jesus heightens the expectation that his predictions about his own death and resurrection would come true.
Right.
Right?
In addition to all this, even more. Great. This is good stuff. There is a solid eyewitness testimony preserved in the New Testament that Jesus didn't stay dead. Right. In the weeks that followed his resurrection, Jesus' disciples had many encounters which they were absolutely convinced were real meetings with Jesus. Physically risen from the dead. Eats with them, teaches them, talks with them, walks along with them, sits down, rests with them, all these important things. It's important to recognize that these weren't fleeting, ghostly apparitions. I think I see Jesus out in the distance on the waves. Oh, okay.
You see it? It's wavering out there.
Yeah. The disciples talked with Jesus. They ate with him. They touched him. They had every opportunity to confirm that they weren't hallucinating or seeing a ghost. In fact, when he happens to do ghost-like things like go into a locked room, he says, "Here, touch me physically," and presents himself as a spirit.
Yeah. So it's just as important to note that some of the people who testified about seeing Jesus alive weren't believers before the crucifixion, right? So even these folks didn't believe. For instance, James's half-brother. Before Jesus' death, James was a skeptic, right? In fact, he was claimed them to be crazy and that kind of stuff, right?
Come on back home. What are you doing?
Yeah. But soon after, his resurrection, James became a leader in the fledgling Christian church in Jerusalem. So what could have changed James' mind, right? Another very significant witness is the Apostle Paul, right? Again, he was one that, clearly didn't believe Jesus before the crucifixion, right? But his testimony is particularly weighty because he's an independent witness with no prior reason to accept the resurrection, Anderson tells us.
Right.
In fact, he initially persecuted the first converts to Christianity.
Had them arrested, had them killed, vehemently was against Christians, and then has a thing happen to him somewhere along the way, and he completely changes his entire worldview, his entire life. He goes away from what he was raised in, what he was known. He was probably on track to be part of the Pharisees that hired him to go out and terrorize the early Christians, but then he becomes one of them. It's like zombies, he's added to the collective. So in addition to all this, there is a solid eyewitness testimony preserved in the New Testament that Jesus didn't stay dead. So the combined strength of all the eyewitness testimony to Jesus' resurrection is quite remarkable. This wasn't just one or two disciples trying to salvage their master's reputation, seeing how far they could get away with it, filling their coffers. I mean, we all know the extraordinary wealth that the early Christians seem to exude, and we know Paul became this very rich person who didn't have to work anymore.
No, he didn't.
Right. Okay. So hundreds of people from diverse backgrounds, some of whom were initially skeptical and hostile, claim to have met Jesus alive after his crucifixion on multiple occasions. In fact, you see the early church and you see, again, this diverse background, especially the rich and the poor coming together in Rome. That was a dangerous sign for the Romans. You're like, wait a minute, it's one thing for this backwater country of the Judeans to have their strange god and whatnot. Fine, but now you're starting to take our centurions, our rich people. I don't know. We can't really have that. We need temple taxes, and you need to still bolster the state.
Right.
Many of them were ready to die rather than renounce their testimonies, and defies reason to think that they were either lying or deceived. So this kind of argument from embarrassment and argument from I don't know. They had something to lose, including their lives.
Yeah. If I knew it was a lie, why would I be willing to die for it? Right? I mean, that seems like
at some point, just renounce it. And you're fine. You put the pinch of incense on the altar of Caesar, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I'll just move, and no one will know.
Yeah. So all this fits neatly into the broader context of the Christian worldview, right? The resurrection of Jesus isn't some kind of super duper miracle just kind of thrown into the Christian worldview to make it a bit more exciting, like extra spice tossed into some soup.
I mean, it's a big claim to try and bolster onto people, other than Lazarus, it's not well known that anyone kind of died and stayed dead for a bit and then came to life. It's a weird claim other than, okay, well, maybe you can hypnotize people to think that they're healed from a disease that you've had, or you set up some fake blind people in cities for most of their life, and then you come by and you heal them, or you have people kind of just lie about you. But I mean, that's a big lie if you're going to try and bolster on.
But notice here, this whole resurrection fits into the Christian worldview. It's part of what we would expect as a result of the Christian worldview, right? It's an integral part of the biblical storyline, right? So it's not just some tack-on type of thing. Death is the just punishment for our rebellion against God, right? And the wages of sin is death, Paul tells us in Romans, and our inhumanity towards others. And so the mission of the Messiah was to make atonement for our sins, right? To pay for our sins and to restore us to a right relationship with God. Right. So it's part. This whole thing fits in with the whole Christian worldview, the whole Christian story, the whole biblical line. It's not some tag on. Oh, and by the way, Jesus rose from the dead.
Right. Yeah. And the very fact that Jesus goes to his death and seems to go to the worst place you could possibly go, which is Jerusalem at the time, where he's more surrounded by his enemies. It seems like he's very antagonistic if it comes to come to a head, which it does. And he's betrayed within, but he could have gone to Tyre and Sidon and went up north and kind of stayed away and just separated himself more from the people that hated him. Yeah. But he goes in, he curses the fig tree, he goes and cleanses the temple again. Like, he's doing all the wrong things not to be killed.
Yeah. What is he thinking?
It seems like a weird power play for someone who has.
So when he starts toward Jerusalem, I think it's Thomas that says, "Okay, we're fine. We're going to our death."
Right. Yeah, even Thomas. You're right. Absolutely.
We'll go and die too, I guess. Right.
Resign to it. Into the breach. All right. Whatever. So in one sense, Jesus' resurrection is the confirmation that he really was who he claimed to be, and he really did what he claimed to do. So I claim, I'm an important person, and I show that sign by dying and rising from the dead. I would say that's a pretty big power move there. That would show some semblance of truth to my claims there, especially within the context. Again, it's not a separate, like, here's this crazy person that says, "Oh, I can fly," and you say, "Okay, well, can you prove it?" Well, I did, 30 years ago. Well,
that's
okay,
right.
It's within a context. It has a system backing it, and a religious context, a social context.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just a singularity event. In some, Christianity without the resurrection of Jesus would make little sense.
Right.
He was a good teacher. He does a few things. He says, "Be kind to your neighbors." Great. Okay. He's like Confucianism. Put him on the shelf with the same one.
That's right.
So to the extent that we have reason to believe the other elements of Christian worldview, and we have argued that we do, we also have reason to believe in the resurrection.
Right. Good.
And so I think here is where we'll stop, and next time we'll finish up this chapter by looking at the unreasonableness of the alternatives.
That's right. So we'll take a look at, okay, if he didn't rise from the dead, then how else could we explain?
Right.
And that's what he wants to spend the latter part of the chapter on, right?
And we'll probably also cover the final chapter.
Yeah, the final chapter is rather short, but and so we'll take a look at that as well.
Great. Thanks for joining us. Continue to enjoy and take books off your shelf, blow off the dust, and we'll figure out which one's our next one. So if you have good ideas, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And we kind of have an idea of where we want to take it, but always looking for good books to add to our empty bookshelf, which I'll have to get another bookshelf to make it empty and then not fill it up with more things.
Right.
So thanks again.
Yep. We'll see you next time.